Good evening. Good evening. My name is Ann Riley Fink, class of 1966 from CSUN. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this absolutely beautiful new Alumni Center. I think we're one of the first audiences and groups to gather here. So we're enjoying it in all its early youth. And now, Samantha Greenfield is an employer engagement specialist at the Sloan Center on Aging and Work. In her role, Sam connects employers around the world with the center's research-based projects. Her past experience has included working in human resources at 2 large Boston law firms, as well as chairing several events for local nonprofit organizations. Sam holds a BA degree in communications from Elon University, North Carolina. In her spare time, Sam can be found chasing after her 2 small boys in Sudbury. Thank you, Sam.
Good evening. Before I get started, I love questions throughout the presentation because I think it helps everybody feel at ease. It makes things a little less formal, and we can make sure all of your questions are addressed. So I will do questions at the end as well, but at any point, please just raise your hand and interrupt me so I'm not just standing up here talking all night long. So thank you for coming. I'm actually right across the parking lot here at the Sloan Center on Aging and Work. In our office, we have 18 people. We have a team of researchers who we opened in 2005, and their primary goal is to research the aging workforce is how we started. Now it's turned into more the multi-generational workforce. Especially in the last 2 years, we're seeing a big transition from now companies were starting to look at the aging employees, and now they've actually expanded to say, we need to look at every generation and how it's affected in the workplace. So, at any point after tonight, if you want to give me your card or take my card, you can join our center's website, where we have a new blog that comes out, usually twice a month. We send out monthly emails with statistics of which companies are doing what for the multi-generational workforce. And a lot of people actually use our site to pull information and research to put into their own presentations. So not only do we research, like the Generations of Talent study was a study that we did in 11 countries. We also do presentations in various employer sites and academic settings. Engaged as We Age, as our director, Jackie James, has a great presentation on engaging the older employee. We have the blog, as I mentioned, and then my primary role is I work with companies around the world, and we team them together to feature what they're doing for the aging workforce, and we come out with case studies. I actually left a summary of our most recent study on your chair, and that's called Flexibility in the Older Worker. And that was a study that we did on 3 companies, which I'll go into detail, but we talked about how they were working to recruit, retain, and engage the older worker. So that's a little bit about where I am. Tonight we are here to talk about the generation gap. And as I said, if there are things that you feel you'd like to get more information about or you have questions, please stop me at any time. So our center has what we look at the aging workforce in what we term the prism of age, which we like to think of age is not just how old you are. It can be looked at in many different ways. It can be looked at chronologically, obviously, but also your life stage. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are having children in their 40s, so they might feel younger versus, than your typical, mid-20s having children. Depending on where you are in your career stage, we come across a lot of people now who are starting new careers as they're boomers. They're going to feel younger because when they get to a company, they're going to be with traditionally younger employees. So these are the different stages that we look at, and we don't believe age is just the year you were born. This is an example of how we like to help you figure out where you are based on your age. For example, I'll use myself as an example. I'm 41, so I'm a little under 50 there. But I actually I always worked in HR before coming to BC. And I was, far along in my career. I had 2 children. I stayed home for a couple of years. I came to BC to work at the center where I'm an HR person, so I actually was now working doing development and marketing So then I felt pretty early career, even though my life stage, I might consider myself, a little under midlife. So my mapping looks like this. So it really kind of, it is interesting that we see people at all different stages feel differently about their age now based on many different components. The other thing that we talk to a lot of companies about is the quality of employment. And this is actually kind of the starting point for a lot of employers that we've talked to. The ones who are making changes for their different generational employees, they've actually gone and done employee surveys and found out that, in fact, there are many different components to what makes people happy at work these days. It's not just your job, it's not just your pay. Actually, Cisco just had a study that Generation X and Y, the most important thing to them is not money, but if they can get on Facebook on a normal day at the office. So, there's definitely, but, there are a lot of people who, are they going to have opportunities for meaningful work? Is it flexible? Is there respect? So there's all different components that make up what makes you happy about your job. So the companies that we are speaking to generally who've made changes in their flexibility programs have been ones who've paid attention to this whole quality of employment component. Our study before our last study was in the fall. And these were companies that we worked with that were at the start. This came out in October. This was when we felt, about a year ago, we were hearing more and more companies saying, okay, age is an issue. We're in HR, and you know what? We have to actually start thinking about age as an issue. So we worked with Cornell, Dell, GSK, Marriott, MITRE, and Wells Fargo. And they started saying, not only is diversity, but they actually said that, age is actually a factor. And we went over our prism of age with them, and they said, yes, these employees do resonate with the prism of age, because what they were realizing across all the generations is socialization is very important for people. Whether you're 65 or 25, a lot of people want to have social relationships. So they started focusing on that. Although, I will say a year ago, people kind of had this vague strategy. They didn't really, while they knew age was an issue, we were hearing from a lot of employers, they didn't really know what to do with that information. So, what a lot of companies had started doing is saying that they were going to put together some groups of, networking groups is what a lot of employers call it. So we heard of a lot of companies who would say, okay, the way to first figure out how important socialization is and how we can bring all these generations together is to get them together socially in a networking group. So this is where we've generally seen the trend kind of start, is by two different ways. We see employers hand out surveys and kind of get information from their employees on what they like. And then we also see kind of the next phase of that moves into, let's get them together. And we've seen all different models. We see a lot of companies who start out with networking groups just by generation. But even once 2012 has hit, more companies are now trying to kind of first they want to separate the generations, and now people are kind of bringing them back together because they're finding that it helps the different generations learn about each other if they're together. And from doing this, what was really helpful to these companies is they started realizing all the value their older workers had. Once they were in these networking groups, they felt like people were sharing knowledge, and they could really see that, in fact, these retirees, a lot of them call them, or mature workers. We kind of hear mature worker, older worker, retiree. But we shouldn't really let people retire quite yet with all this knowledge and skill. So huge positive strides were made. They were realizing that long-term, the mature workers not only had the knowledge, but they also have respect. They also have a great work ethic. So this is how companies started to realize that, there's a lot more positive than we realized for our older workers. So what each company that was featured in our study did is they took our quality of employment and tried to figure out what is important to each age group and what can we see that kind of goes together. Marriott, for example, which they did not expect this at all, but they found out that the reason their employees stay there and actually they don't retire because it's their culture. They have a large Hispanic population with their Marriott across the country, and they realized that the culture of Marriott is you work where you feel part of a family. And if you feel part of a family, you're not going to leave your family. So that's why their mature workers were staying on the job. So what was great about Marriott is they started then refocusing their HR programs to feel more family focused. Having more events where all the family could come, whether that be large cookouts, which they hadn't been having, large family events, bring your children to work day, things where everyone felt their whole family was involved, which, a lot of companies had gotten away from over the last couple of years because attendance was low. Well, they realized that, in fact, this was a big selling point to their employees. So they changed their motto to now, if you take care of your associates will take care of your customers, and the customers will come back again. And they took this, they really focused on the dependability, the longevity, and, the fact that people weren't leaving. So Marriott's was very successful and still continues to be. Cornell actually they started a great program. They realized that what was very important to their older workers are the relationships they made. And they want to feel part of a group that appreciates and respects them, and they want to build their relationships with their coworkers. So Cornell decided that they didn't want these people to leave, and in order to keep them and retain them, they designed Encore Cornell, which is a great program. It has different components and different levels based on how the mature worker wants to work. Do they want to work full-time for the next couple of years and then phase slowly into retirement? Do they want to leave now and come back 1 or 2 days a week? Do they want to volunteer in the surrounding community and just tap in? But they really structured this program so even when you eventually retire, you still always feel part of Cornell, and you have not left, and you're part of this group, which to them, again, is very important because the relationship piece was so key. The next company was Dell, and they actually have what they found. They thought they had a lot more older workers, but in turn, when they got their groups together, they realized the younger workers were the ones saying, what about us? We keep hearing about the aging workforce, but at Dell, they have a very young, because they're technology, a young group. And so they actually realized that was the group they needed to focus more on and keeping them happy. And they realized that these people who were, if they were to consider leaving, they would be leaving for lack of learning development. So they started a networking group called Gen X, as a spinoff in Generation X. And what they would do is they did Facebook and Twitter groups. So their social networking would occur on social media. And they gave them money, by the way. They gave them money to do this group. And they got a Facebook account, and they all started connecting through Facebook. They started working in the community and volunteering together during office times, but together, again, gave them something that they could be learning together as a group. They started doing more sales meetings and marketing under their business development with employees at all different levels. So again, they would feel like they were being mentored and learning more from all the executives. And they also started giving them tuition reimbursement and offering classes that they could take locally. So they really focused on, it was just very helpful once they tapped into what the needs of their employees were to figure out what to do. So all of these companies, they all really focused on life outside of your day-to-day job. They all started working on life outside of work and gave it a holistic approach. So that, it was unanimous that if you're going to start working on the generations, it's really helpful to look beyond your day-to-day. And the Prism of Age helped them, as did our quality of employment. The media definitely is using this to their advantage, but really, helping people increase the awareness. I don't know if you've seen, but in the early winter, that McDonald's even had a whole ad campaign, and they were always older people going in to eat McDonald's, and we're seeing, you definitely see a big difference not only in movies, commercials. We see a lot of advertisements that are now kind of showing that the workforce is not so one-dimensional. So, which spawned our next study, which is what you have a copy of, which is how, we definitely saw in the last year that people felt like, okay, we need to focus on age. Now these companies went the next step forward to say, okay, how do we attract older workers? How do we keep the older workers we have? And how do we recruit and engage? So what they all realized is, not only did they need to keep their employees that they had who were older workers happy and engaged in their work, because if they weren't engaged in their work, they would leave, but they also had to recruit new ones. So in a lot of these companies re-careered their older workers. We're seeing that a lot, where somebody might be in one role, but either through some training or some offline classes, they'll move them into a different area before losing them. And this will help older workers continue to be effective on the job. So Central Baptist Hospital was the first one that we worked with, and they started doing career coaching, because the hospital, this hospital specifically, and actually a lot of the whole medical world that we have spoken with, there's a very large problem eventually is going to be with nurses, because the recruitment of nurses is very low. So they realized before losing their nurses, what they wanted to start doing was figuring out why were the nurses leaving, and their older workers, if they were retiring, let's help them get the career coaching they need to maybe move into a management role or a different area and give them a new lease on a new start to their career. So they started doing career coaching, and then they started changing their flexibility plan. Obviously with nursing and the medical industry in general, it's hard to give people flexibility because you have to be there when the patients are there. But that Central Baptist Hospital came up with some new scheduling components. They started using Facebook to get people to do their schedules through Facebook, giving people smartphones and using smartphone technology so that nurses would get their schedule to their phone and could immediately say, yes or no, and have a little more control. Yes, they still have to come in and work when there's a patient there, but they might have a little more control, which gave the nurses, they felt more control over their schedule, and they felt like they had flexibility. And sometimes, too, that just meant giving them 3 weeks' notice of their schedule versus a week's notice, but at least you could say, my child has this game and I want to attend, or I want to go away. So that's what Central Baptist Hospital, they really focused on changing the flexibility program. Marriott, their hourly employees wanted to be a little more flexible, and again, they have most of their employees at Marriott have similar situation where they have to be on site. But again, if they felt they had flexibility with their schedule, they felt like they had a little more control. MITRE did phased retirement and part-time on-call, similar to Cornell's program. And it's actually, what they do is they call it reserves on the ready, and that way the retiree at Marriott can not only work less hours on site, but they can also leave for a couple of years, and if they want to come back, they can be in a pool of, I want to come back one day every 3 months, I want to come back a couple hours, I want to come back once a week. You become part of this pool of retirees who work back on site. CVS, which they've gotten a lot of press for this, so you might have heard about their Snowbird program. Again, they didn't want to lose retirees who were going to be moving to different parts of the country based on the seasons. So they started a program for employees who wanted to, let's say, live in Boston in the summer and wanted to go to Florida for the winter. As part of their Snowbird program, you can relocate to a different CVS location based on the season. Home Depot actually just started a similar program for their employees too. And those have been very popular because being able to have that flexibility of location is huge. And then Cornell, which I told you about, does their Encore Cornell. The challenges that the employers had, I'm telling you this great programs they did, but everything is not, it's not so fantastic on the onset. In general, when, employers roll out to their management team, we're going to start this new flexibility program, we want to, recruit and engage older workers, the biggest resistance from managers is trust. Am I going to be able to trust that someone's working from home and not, out doing something else? And, am I going to be able to manage them if they're not physically here, if their schedule is different than mine? So both Central Baptist Hospital and MITRE did a ton of management training. And, I definitely hear from employers, it's awareness. It's, there's definitely a need to teach people and to create awareness, but then it's also, giving them the tools, teaching a manager that, you don't have to be FaceTime all the time, and you can actually use email to your advantage and communicate with people I met 2 women recently who solely work from home, and they're older, and they, they're like, through instant messaging, I'm communicating to my team the whole time, so they know that I'm not, watching TV or doing something else, and it really helps the communication. And CVS's challenge, I mean, their main challenge was actually that they were losing people rapidly to moving to southern areas. So they actually felt like with the Snowbird program, that drastically changed, and now they have a good group. And MITRE, what they ended up doing, actually, since this study has come out, not only did they started doing the training right when they rolled out the program, and then they actually decided they would do the training. Now it's an ongoing process. So we definitely see awareness is kind of the first step, and then training is the next. So these 2 studies, we at our office definitely saw a difference. We saw, a year ago is age even an issue? And then by, the fall, we definitely heard, okay, a lot of employees are, revamping and readdressing. And now I probably talk to a couple employers each week who are going back and saying, okay, we did our flexibility program in 2008, and it was designed for the working mother, and now we're going back and saying, it's actually the older employees and the younger employees who want flexibility. It's not just the stereotypical. I mean, I have one company who said that they had to revamp their flexibility program because they said, yeah, we have tons of working parents, we have working grandparents, and we have 22-year-olds who want to join a band at night, and they don't want to come in early in the morning. So companies are finally realizing that they've had to revamp their flexibility. What that and then is doing is, as they're doing that is helping the older employees who are currently employed stay on, and now they're using those programs to recruit. And that's kind of the last stage that we've seen, is that now companies, as they've moved on to redo their flexibility programs, they're moving on to also create the jobs to recruit people to come in. And we get a lot of calls in our office from people looking for work, and they say, how am I going to, how is this going to change, and when is it going to change? And because it's kind of a tiered approach, it definitely is not as rapid as people would like it to be. But we are hearing a big change recently of employers who are saying, okay, we're doing a good job of keeping the people we have here, but now the market has turned and people do have a little more flexibility. I mean, it was easy in the last couple of years to keep people happy because also a lot of people weren't leaving. But now that the market has gotten better, they've really had to go back and say, okay, what can we do to not only keep people here happy, but to bring on some older workers? So Wells Fargo has actually done a great job. They did this exact model where they had a networking group. They first launched it with the Boomers Network. That was for people over 60. Then they came up and their younger employees said, why don't we have networking groups too? So they started getting networking groups per generation. Then the next phase for them was to take the different groups and merge them and have them interact socially together. And what they realized through these groups, I mean, it's one thing to do an employee survey and you might get feedback, but if you get a group of employees together and if they're either after hours out, you're going to get a little more information. People feel a little more comfortable in a group. And what they then found out from their boomers specifically is the over 65 employees said there isn't any training, there isn't enough learning and development classes for us offered. Everything is geared towards the 25 to 35-year-old. So Wells Fargo first started saying, okay, let's beef up our tuition reimbursement. And the boomers came back and said, we want more. And so now Wells Fargo has just rolled out, they actually have a university in Minnesota come and do courses at Wells Fargo to get their master's. And I went and spoke a year ago, and there was like 75% of the room, everyone in the room, by the way, was over 60. 75% of the room, everyone was going back to get a different master's degree. And it was remarkable to see the difference of, because people are living longer and they're working longer. So here is a group. And so now Wells Fargo, has drastically changed their not only retention, but now they're getting people coming to them who want to be hired because they know that they have this program. So it's, it's definitely a slower process, but we're, with the economy picking up, we are seeing more employers, who are starting to design jobs in, and they're also starting to recruit in different areas, in different places, whether it be if, they feel like we hear a lot of employers calling us to say, okay, we're trying to redesign where we're going to recruit from. And we need to kind of open our eyes to different avenues that we can get people. And a lot of the employers we work with use the website retirementjobs.com, because they were like, we will go there and post. So it's not as obvious as we are looking for somebody who's over 65, but literally you'll see a lot more employers, and you can actually go onto a site like retirementjobs.com and say, these employers are clearly age friendly. And you can tell that those, are the employers who are more into recruiting for all different ages, which I think helps. Because that's the feedback that we get from a lot of people who contact our office to say, can you help us? And so, there are definitely sites that kind of can help you more with that. I've been talking a ton. Well, it's funny. Well, two reasons. So his question is, how much focus do we have on smaller companies? Number one, our office is actually funded by the companies. That's how we're funded. The Sloan Foundation funds us to do our research studies, and then corporations sponsor us. So traditionally. But also, I talk to a lot of small companies who things are not as formal, and they don't necessarily want to be publicized. A lot of smaller companies will offer flexibility or hire, and retain, but they also don't have anything informal. It's just, happening off the cuff. So that's usually, I'll talk to a lot of people, but they usually don't necessarily want to be in the press for. I mean, most companies will not, again, they will not, completely publicize if there is a pay disparity between older workers and younger workers. But we are seeing a lot of, in order to keep older workers happy, we are seeing employers come back and now that they're valuing older workers, they are also compensating them for that. Is that what you're saying? No. Usually if you're retrained, if anything, you're actually being promoted because you're gaining new skills and you're moving to a different area. So you're actually, the hopes of, because the idea is to keep the person happy and keep them there, not paying them as much. So the idea would be to promote them, because that, quite frankly, is much less expensive for an employer to keep somebody than it is to hire someone outright. So, no, we're seeing a lot. I mean, what I think is nice is we keep hearing from employers that they're realizing the value that an older employee has. You can train on a lot of skills. You can't train on commitment or loyalty. You can't train on all the knowledge that someone has. There are certain things. I was actually telling someone when we were, before we started, that we're seeing a lot of companies who started doing networking groups. Now they're spinning into mentor groups. And we're also seeing some reverse mentoring, which is actually really interesting. So they're taking the older employee and the younger employee, and the younger employee is actually the mentor, and teaching the older employee, this is your iPhone, and here are these apps that you can use. And then the older employee is saying, here are my contacts and here's my knowledge, and they're learning so much. And it, just like I said earlier, it's an awareness. It's great because now, everybody has learned so much about each other that they're definitely much more open-minded than they were, which is helpful. The Hartford in Connecticut has a fantastic reverse mentoring program, and so does Cisco. And Cisco, I was just talking to them recently, and they were telling me that, that there were these younger employees. Their problem was they were losing younger employees because they had more older employees in some of their sites. Once the younger employees started being reversed mentored and learning a lot from their older employees, they felt like, all right, now I feel more part of the company, and I feel like, my role here is more clearly defined. The older employee felt like, okay, I just gained some new skills and I can actually use, social media, for example, to do my job. And so they actually, by sharing that, with each other, they're creating a relationship, number one, and number two, they're learning, so they're a lot more, interested to learn about each other, and they're a lot more open-minded. Not as closed-minded, I guess I should say. The question is about, do we, see a lot about conflicts of the intergenerations? Conflicts tends to be what people are afraid of. That is, usually the resistance when companies say they're going to start doing intergenerational work. Is that, are there going to be conflicts working amongst the generations? We had one group who wanted to do intergenerational work, but they actually said, people are too angry at each other. They have all these, because they had stereotypes and biases. So Slowly, the process definitely has to be slowly, but slowly they started getting, introducing the employees to each other in networking groups so they could learn what each other are like as people. And they would, obviously you're going to feel different about somebody if you become, if you get to know them personally. So all of a sudden, the older employee who saw the younger employee as someone, who didn't care about their day or their work was realizing that, in fact, outside of work, they were juggling taking care of ailing parents, even though they were only 22. But, there were definitely a lot of preconceived. So the conflicts that we've seen, while we've seen them, the research that we've had is that it's drastically changed when they can do groups together. And that usually, and especially when the employer will sponsor the groups. It's one thing to say, let's start a networking group, but that, that takes some revenue, and it's nice when the employer sponsors it with money and says, okay, here's money for you guys to go out, or we'll bring in a speaker for you, or, you're gonna all go volunteer together. One company we spoke to, that's what they did. They really started volunteering together, and once the different generations worked together cleaning up this conservation land, they, in fact, started really, realizing the strengths each other had. So the conflict that we see is usually reduced by that. I mean, it sounds simple, but, it's building relationships that helps. I mean, the companies that we've seen that have had the most success as far as building these relationships, they've been very involved in the process. And when I say that, I mean, saying, okay, the reverse mentoring, the companies that have been the most organized are ones who set up the pairings and then say, you need to meet with this person. Not only do you need to go to these events, but you also need to meet with this person one-on-one, and give them topics to talk about. I mean, it's not as, it definitely needs to be guided along. But once both sides see that there's something to gain, it does change. The egos is definitely an issue. But we definitely saw, all of us, because I've seen it on both sides. I've seen I've heard of younger employees being the more upset generation. I've heard of older employees being the more upset generation in these conflicts. But once they both gain something, for example, this one group, the executives were, very against, they're too busy. Like, they don't have time to work on building relationships. Well, I mean, as silly as it sounds, once they were learning, all of a sudden they got all these new apps on their iPhone and learned how to use them and started using how to text their own children and how to use Facebook, they felt hipper and they were like, then more inclined. So once they kind of found a common bond, it definitely changed things. So they gained something. And then in a similar company, the younger employee who got to network and actually saw that what actually was fantastic about the reverse mentoring program that I'm speaking about, they then saw brainstorming sessions spin off and new projects spin off because people would actually, they would actually take their job, put it aside for 20 minutes and connect with someone in a different generation. All of a sudden, new ideas were generated and a positive happened. And so then that would kind of fuel better relationships after that.
I work for Pete Marwick, so it's a international consulting firm. So generally, for instance, I got an email from a client saying, I just got laid off from my term ended as chief risk officer. Can you help me out there? So a lot of it's transitional. So some of it's it's permanent consulting. So it's so we're not posting postings out there, but a lot of them. By it's just referrals, personal referrals. We'll get an email or a phone call, and then we have like a 2-week process where we bring them on board, take them out to a couple clients to like a little boot camp, and then we determine whether or not this is something we're both interested in doing.
What's been nice is, from being in the HR world before, referrals is always a great way to get people. What's been nice, I've seen a lot more connections made on not only Facebook, but on LinkedIn. Some people use Twitter too, but LinkedIn and Facebook, we're seeing a lot of people connecting and then spreading the word about jobs that way too, which is nice.
And I wanted to follow up on if you have any experiences with smaller companies that are doing it more off the cuff and therefore not putting that formal framework in place to help support it. And if you can speak to maybe examples where companies have tried to do this and not been successful and some of the pitfalls and things to watch out for.
I mean, the trust issue is huge for people who are generally, I'm going to speak in general terms, but generally people who are against making changes to flexibility. those are the people who are generally, it's a trust thing. If I don't see you in my office, because generally, if you're not here physically, then we can't hold a meeting, and then who knows if you're working, and, I need you here from 9 to 5, face to face. So it's a trust thing. And not that, and there are a lot of employees who don't think they should have to prove, that they're working all the time. Blue Cross Blue Shield has what they call an e-worker program. And for them, not only did they want to change this program to keep people happy and recruit more people, but they also wanted to save on real estate. So when they designed this program, they said, we're going to have to do it all or nothing. You either work from home or you work in the office, but it's not a 1 day home, 1 day here, because we're going to actually, give up your office space. And that was a major change. And they said it actually took over a year of working with managers by creating awareness of, this can be done. And it wasn't until really they could actually they needed to see productivity results at the end of a year. Now, in a smaller company, obviously at a larger company, it's easier to get these metrics in place. But we've seen it in smaller companies, and they don't do it as formally. It's more, a lot of employees will say, test it out. When people come to me and say, how do I get somebody to let me work, flexible hours or work from home? We tell a lot of people, we've seen employees say to their boss, just let me try it for 3 months. And if it works, that's great. And if it doesn't, and so, and vice versa. Managers who are very against it are often coached. If it's not formal, say, let's just give it a try. So that's usually the way people kind of do it off the cuff, is not as formally, as a testing. But, mainly the resistance has been trust.
The trust is not with the employees, but it's with the managers who are doing it. And so we'll deal with other staff where the managers aren't overseeing it, and in fact, there's not productivity. They are at the car wash watching TV, and that impacts using real examples, right? And that impacts the ability of collaborative teams to get work done. Right. And so...
And then you have the employees who are
Yeah, and it doesn't work. Flexibility in another area isn't working, and that then limits their ability to advocate for flexibility on their own behalf, or,
right.
It just creates problems. And what seems to be the clear answer is management training, but
right.
when you don't have an organization with resources to make that happen,
right.
and how do you tackle it?
We did talk to 2 companies who didn't do training. That's when they did actually mentoring groups. So sometimes when you have the younger employee then mentoring, if it's known that is their relationship, they have a little more power to kind of, but you still, if the managers are the people who are the problem without training, because a lot of companies we see, small companies specifically, they have somebody who might have started when they were 18 at the job and has become a manager just out of default. And without the training, you're asking someone to do something that they don't have the skills necessarily to do. But I don't know what you do as far as when there's not training involved, because that's pretty hard. You're kind of putting someone in a role they're not very comfortable.
Fostering collaboration when it's off-site, when employees are working off-site.
So those are the employers who've used either their own intranet to form a group. This one company I was speaking to just last week, they took their own intranet and started doing online, they would do online chatting, but then they would also do online motivators. Like they had these little badges that they would give, so the different people working at home would connect in and say, I did this many sales calls today, and I did this many sales calls, and they'd give each other these little online badges. It became like a game for them. And it's just a very competitive office, so they were thriving with this. And then it's okay, when we get a certain amount of badges, we're all going to meet at this place for lunch. So people do that. People use Skype a lot to connect them. But it's funny, I've seen a lot of people not like Skype lately because the people who work from home don't want to necessarily have to get dressed for Skype. But people use Skype, and if they don't have their own intranet, that's how a lot of people used Facebook. I mean, Central Baptist Hospital was a prime example. They couldn't afford, at the time, a scheduling software. It's expensive. So we could use Facebook, and they can all become connected. And so that helps. Blue Cross Blue Shield definitely has certain events during the year where they can connect, but it's using Skype that really helps, and the online instant messaging, because then you can feel like you can ask quick questions. Because that's the flaw when you're not working together in an office. You're not just going to get up and walk across the room or walk down the hall, and so instant messaging helps because you can literally be sending messages right away. Instant messaging is definitely, I think, more of a younger generational tool. But again, if a lot of times we're seeing once the older generation learns how to use the tool can be really beneficial. It's just a matter of not being as familiar with it. I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, they definitely have. I mean, Blue Cross Blue Shields is a little more unique because they literally saved $5.5 million last year just by getting this e-worker program, because they could give up real estate of employees. And so they said they really have to Skype a lot and do it that way. That helps.
It's interesting. I used to work in academic publishing, and when I worked in academic publishing, most of the people I worked with tended to be older. And then I moved into a company where out of the maybe 50 people there were 2 of us over the age of 35. And I was one of those. And so in wanting to really relate really well and build relationships with the younger people that were there, and really to understand their perspective about work and how to better motivate them as well as just work better together, a lot of this particular organization offered an awful lot of types of outside events, as you were mentioning earlier. Mm-hmm. And I did all kinds of things. I mean, I went to all these events and built great relationships with all of these individuals that in some cases could have been, my kids.
Yeah.
And loved it, and they classified me as hip and all that sort of thing, and I loved that, I mean, that's more of a 60s term, admittedly, but,
Mm-hmm.
I took it. And I'm one of those individuals where, I love IT, I have my BlackBerry, I've got my Facebook account, I'm right there. Now, that's great, I loved it. But now that I'm actually looking for work, I'm now kind of in a similar situation to as this particular little clip on TV, except flipped. That click was more maybe what happened 10 years ago when all the older workers were still there,
Right.
and the younger workers were coming in and all of a sudden maybe being promoted or brought in because they had more IT skills or they had some sort of a knowledge or whatever, and that situation occurred. What's happening now, however, is that when you're out there as an older worker trying to get back into the workforce and you're now interviewing with somebody who's a lot younger, how do you indicate to them that you're very comfortable, first of all, working for somebody who's younger, and you are aware of technology, you're very comfortable with it, and that you would fit well in that organization?
I mean, I think that the people that we've talked to that have the most success say that they're very honest in their interview process. A lot of people are worried in an interview that this person's thinking these things about me, or a lot of times those people I've spoken with who've been successful have come out and said, by the way, I'm very comfortable with the fact that you're younger than me, which seems kind of off-putting to people, but it's really it's honesty that actually or by the way, I really, want to be working all the time now. And those are the people who generally, by bringing up the subject honestly, it actually helps. That's what we've heard. I mean, the employees the people looking that I have talked to, they've also tried to. People try and think of a way to show your technology or show the skills that you have, which can be hard. But I've heard of a lot of success people who connected with friends on Facebook or on LinkedIn and connected with friends and friends and friends. And then when they're interviewing, they've already kind of made a connection off, just as a name. Now you're, in their office, there's already kind of been a connection established, which helps. You've already kind of, formed a little bit of a social relationship, which can kind of help. But I have heard a lot of people being very honest. And it helps, to sit there and say, listen, I want to be working all the time, or, I really am excited about this job, and I'm not going to, my plan is long-term. This is the next chapter, and I'm excited about this. Those are the people that I've heard, and actually, I'm now thinking of 3 people I met who met people when they were going back to school, and then they would, from friends of those friends, get a job interview, and this one woman was telling me how, she's like, it was actually great because this woman she was interviewing with HR knew somebody who knew somebody who knew that she was in a grad class. And she said, she never would have asked me because I'm 68 years old, am I in school? But I was able to bring that up. So it's honesty that a lot of people, when I was on the HR side of the world, I liked it when people were honest. Obviously, sometimes they're a little too honest, but no, but honesty is good.
There's not a computer lab, but we have 2 alumni visitor offices. So if you're traveling and you need a space, you need an office, you need a computer, you need Wi-Fi, you can come in here and reserve some space and use an office for a little while. Right in this building, first floor. Mhm.
I'm curious where Boston College is globally, and what they're doing to retain their older workers, their phenomenal workforce, calling back others. Where are they in that process? There's a microcosm here that's doing great work and has been for a long time, and it's well known. So reaching out to the BC community, HR, is this on the table to be discussed, what they're planning to do here?
And Jean's. Well, and Jean can probably answer more. I definitely come across a lot of BC alumni that use the BC alumni site and, to kind of connect in. And they use events like this to network and meet people and connect in. As far as being offered for BC retirees, I'm not sure what type of programs they're doing.
Sam, kind of a follow-up question. How does BC respond, as far as HR, respond to your work and your findings? And how do they take that? And where do they take that? And do you see any kind of openings for more flexible workspaces? Because you and I have had a couple of conversations
Right.
that some departments are a little bit more apt to allow it and other departments aren't.
In large companies, this is kind of the pattern that we see, which is what's happening at BC. It first takes people, first it's IT. IT is always the first group who gets flexibility. No matter, almost every single company I've talked to, IT starts with it. Then, and that's actually what's happened at BC, like for a while, the IT department has been flexible. And then managers let people have their own flexibility under the radar and off the cuff. But you can't talk about it, you can't, and that's actually what happened at BC. I have not heard if and so there are a lot of informal arrangements, and that's how BC speaks to it, that we have informal arrangements, but I have not heard of it being formal. And I do think the alumni, I think retirees, especially alumni, is a great program. And we do share all of our studies with BC HR to let them know, this is what we see that's out there. And a lot of these companies, their driver is that they're losing people. That's usually a major reason. They're losing people. And BC actually does not have that problem at all, ever. So of course, that's, because that's usually why companies react. They also want to hear how their employees are happy, but it's also a business, decision.
I don't have a question, but just a comment. My kids are still in high school and in middle school, so I can only work part-time. But when I am talking with, for example, my family from Poland or friends, and I say, when my kids are in college, I will be looking for a full-time job. And they look like me and they say, you're too old to find a full-time job. So I just wanted to comment how much I love this presentation, because I am optimist and very optimistic that of course I will find a job. And everybody has talents and gifts, and if we have this kind of mind that we can be gift to one another, and we don't have to be afraid of each other, and regardless of age, we have our strengths and places where we can improve, and it's all about relationship and being part of a community and help one another and build up one another.
And to my point of being honest earlier, if you're applying for a part-time job, but your plan is in 5 years that you want full-time, share that, because that's helpful information, because then someone has a big picture. They might be hiring for part-time, but they might be thinking, we really want someone who's going to grow. This position is just a test position. I got approval for a part-time person, but ideally I need a full-time person. Well, it's helpful to know, just by the way, I'm only doing part-time because of my situation right now, but long-term. No, that also tells the employer that you're thinking long-term. You're not thinking you're just coming in here for a couple of years. So that's helpful.
I just wanted to add a comment to the last question or observations. One of the things I've learned from young people coming in when they interview is an assertiveness about wanting to know what kind of culture do you offer and what kind of culture do you promote. And I've learned that from young people because when I was interviewing, I was supposed to fit the mold. I was supposed to be willing to go into any environment and be like the rest of the group. And the younger generation who's coming in, they don't care so much about fitting in, and they want to know, will we be able to foster their interests individually? And I think that's a great learning because I've in turn done that with my own clients and have talked about and asked, what is it your culture is promoting and what are you trying to retain and foster? And I think there's some kind of a shift that's taken place over a couple of generations, and it's, we all can learn from young, and the young people can learn from us. But I think that's been really important, and I've used it several times in my own job.
And companies now, like MITRE, for example, who's wanting to recruit older workers, they realized, well, our orientation program is all geared towards the early 20-year-old. So we can't have these young 20-year-olds doing orientation and helping everyone. So they actually then restructured their whole orientation program to say, okay, it's going to be led by an older worker and a younger worker so that everyone feels comfortable. And everyone feels comfortable talking about their own individual, not, because they were finding, older workers they hired were coming to orientation and feeling like they had to fit in and act like their 25-year-old counterpart when in turn, so they redesigned the whole orientation to make people feel comfortable from the onset, as that happens. Other questions, comments, or anything you wanted to hear more about that you did not this evening? No. Well, if that is it, thank you very much. Thank you. And definitely, as I said, if you log on to our site or give me your card, you can get, you can get into our blog and we get, more information, and you can see obviously the companies that we work with are those companies who are age friendly. If you are in fact that's what led you here. But it will also, we keep coming out with more and more information about kind of the status of things, so it's helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.